All right. Testing. One, two, three. Testing. Shalom, everyone. Shalom. This is the first live stream of 2022, and we actually have a guest for the first live stream on the show, and his name is Rabbi Harry Rosenberg. You can give the audience your credentials to know like how to contact you, and when it comes to how you started your career, just give them a little bit of a breakdown.
Well, I really appreciate that. Thanks for having me. It's a big honor to be here. Anyone who wants to contact me, they can reach me on my personal website, which is basically a timeline of different things that I've done, spoken about, or got involved in for the past 10 or so years at rabbiharry.com. And from there, you can get my contact information and reach out to me, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And it's interesting because I only realized after I started getting involved in this topic of the lost tribes or the found tribes of Israel that I come from an ancient bloodline of rabbis who have been looking for them. But I didn't know that when I got involved in the whole situation. So it seems it's somewhere deep down inside of my soul or my genetics to be on this mission to search. And basically, I would consider myself a social entrepreneur. I'm trying to have my hand in the world of business and growth, but all geared towards the unification of the House of Israel and towards a spiritual future that we could all enjoy.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. So I want to make this known to the audience. This is just a part one. Could be a part two tonight because there's just a lot going on in my household. So we might have to go again tonight at midnight, by the way, my time, Central Standard Time. So just be on the lookout for that. But so the next question I have is, what's one thing you wish you would have known before you began your career? What are a few things that you wish you knew?
You mean besides buy some Bitcoin? Um, but the truth is, before I started my career, I don't really have any should-haves, could-haves, or would-haves in my brain because at this point in my life, I'm just trusting the creator of the universe that everything that happened till now was his plan and meant to be. And I'm not trying to insert my own ego to the exact scenario we find ourselves in right now.
Okay, nice, nice. So, what are some great resources that have helped you along the way when it comes to discovering tribes in Africa that have these Hebrewisms? What are the great resources you used?
Well, definitely the internet, I believe, is extremely fundamental for the unification of the House of Israel. Um, the Jewish people, if you look at their writings and their texts for the past 2,000 years, there's been mention of kingdoms of Israelites or lost tribe kingdoms or villages all throughout Africa and the Silk Road. And it was only based on one man having gone there and getting testimony and then coming back. And there was no way to verify it or be in touch with them. But now with the internet, we're seeing at an unprecedented rate the grouping together of humans to form community. So I think that's the number one resource that is being utilized in this endeavor of building the House of Israel back together. And, there's spiritual teachings to that as well, of the time that the internet came into the world and its purpose, that we believe that according to the prophecies, this was part of the roadmap and it was somewhat predictable.
Okay, nice, nice. So, in a 5 minute to 10 minute, 20 minute, even 30 minute breakdown, I'm going to give you that amount of time. Can you just go into some of the African tribes that you know of that have Hebrewisms within them?
Yeah, well, there's a very clear and concise list. Um, and let's separate it between the groups in Africa that are calling out or self identifying or hear me now.
I can't hear you now. Yeah, it did cut out for a minute. It
If
might be
someone,
my
if
my
I'm on
net.
my phone, so if someone calls me, it like presses pause. It's crazy. But basically, what I was saying, there's certain groups that have an identity, and there's certain other groups that would seem to have Hebrew customs or traditions, but they don't have any desire to be Hebrew, connect to Israel, or to have that claim or identity. So first, let's just discuss the tribes in Africa that say they're from the house of Israel with customs and traditions. And the most, the most obvious or the clearest one is the Ethiopian Jewry, who are already back in Israel, who've gone through conversions. It was written hundreds of years ago, and 500 years ago, and 1,000 years ago that there was a kingdom of Israelites out there in Ethiopia. Ethiopia probably has one of the oldest exile Israelite communities on the planet today. And so that was just the first one that we could bring up. Really interesting. Then, right around that whole part of Africa, you have another one of the oldest Jewish communities in the entire world, which would be the Yemen Jews, the Jews of Yemen. I don't know if we're going to consider it Africa proper, but if you look at the community of the Lemba tribe in South Africa, who claims to have come from the Yemen Jews over 2,000 years ago, you have a village practicing customs and traditions of the laws of Israel deep in the middle of South Africa near Zimbabwe. And not only that, as we spoke about before, DNA is not so necessary to bring up in this conversation because of a few reasons, but this tribe did have the same DNA markers that the priests amongst the Ashkenazim and the Sephardim, and there's an island of priests outside of Jerba in the Mediterranean who have all this Kohen priest Y chromosome gene that was found in the Lemba tribe. So that was obviously very interesting. And what I find to be the most interesting out of all of them would be the Igbo tribe in Western Africa, who the government of Israel, according to their official report, which can be found on the government of Israel's website, is recognizing the Igbo tribe as a seed of Israel from the children of Israel who got lost in the exile and still held on to customs and traditions like eighth-day circumcision, certain customs around marriage and death and burial, things only found amongst the children of Israel. So the Igbo is probably the largest tribe in Africa that is today currently identifying as being from the house of Israel. Even though you do see a lot of other potential Israelite customs in the Western countries of Africa and the Ashanti, native speaking cultures, but you also find a tremendous amount of things that would not be found amongst the people of Israel, like the carving up of skins and drinking of blood, and the worshiping of foreign gods. But at the same time, the children of Israel went into exile already sinning thousands of years ago, worshiping other gods. So it wouldn't be surprising to potentially see their descendants doing the same thing thousands of years later. The Igbo just happens to be the most fascinating, not only because they're actively today trying to create their own Jewish state in Africa to be autonomous and not ruled over by another nation or tribe, which I think is a beautiful goal and aspiration, but they also made up a large percentage of the transatlantic slave trade because the slave owners kept wonderful records. And we know not only which parts of America, which ports and which cities the Igbo tribe were brought to. And now, fast forward 100 years later, there must be Igbo blood, probably an 80 or so percent or more of the African American population. So for me, I just see a stage being set for a tremendous redemption narrative of a great number of humans coming together in peace and love to declare the one God, the God of Moses, and to bring his justice and peace on the world.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I'm going to ask everyone in the comment section to, be respectful of the rabbi, and let's treat him, as a guest in our home. And you can ask questions. I don't know if I'll get to them because we already have another guest, Rue, who's going to be asking very deep and serious questions. So I might be able to get to y'all's questions, but if you are going to ask a question, you have to be respectful. So that kind of gets into African Americans. So you talked about the Igbo and Simba, and we know that they were brought over to the Americas, which us being descendants of those peoples, we would also likely descend from these African tribes with Hebrewisms within their culture. So, can you tell us about like the emerging of Jewishness within African Americans, and how do you think we should go about this when it comes to our awakening?
I mean, it's clearly a phenomenon. And, I am, and I was disturbed when I went to public school in America and I saw the curriculum discussing the foundation of the African American people. And the first thing they tell you about them is just they got off some ships at the ports here with no information prior. So, personally, if I would be, or if I was being an African American, I would just be really upset at like, wait a minute, you took me from my homeland, you took away my language, you took away my culture, and now you're here just trying to like sweep it under the rug and pretend it's all good and move forward. There's something really wrong. So I think just making it a topic of contention that something really wrong happened that has to be made right is the first thing. Secondly, is I think that there's a tremendous opportunity at hand, not necessarily for conversion or becoming Jewish or making Aliyah and going back to Israel, but just to be unified. If you look at America today, it's clear that they're deploying a divide and conquer strategy. Black versus white, right versus left, vaccinated versus unvaccinated. They're always trying to pit groups against each other. And I think that's the case because they know how dangerous a unified people could be. So I think the first thing incumbent upon the African American community is to actually unify and create a wealth and a power that hasn't been seen by humanity. It's in your hands. And now you look at it, you see guys like Kanye West tweeting about being from the house of Israel, Kendrick Lamar in his songs. You got guys like Amari Stoudemire who's studying Torah. It's becoming much more prevalent for the leaders in the African American community to take this Israelite responsibility or role upon themselves. Now we're going to get into later what do we do about the Jewish people and conversion in the state of Israel? That's a whole other conversation. But before any of that happens, become a nation, strengthen up. If you look at the children of Israel when they were in Egypt, they nationed up while in Egypt. They unified. They said, let's have a plan. Let's get the animal and we'll spread the blood on the doorpost and let's link up. Let's get ready to leave together as a unit. They didn't allow the Egyptians to divide and conquer them and create division amongst themselves. So the first thing is just, the economics of it. Pool together resources, assets, and make a plan where your communities are functioning in a holistic manner. And then when you have a body that could be represented by leadership, then you have a seat at the table. What's interesting about the Jewish people now is the unity that we have. We have leaders, we move as a people, we function as a people. We don't have this community at war with that community or this guy, trying to hurt that big guy because he's wearing a different outfit. We act and function as one nation, one brotherhood. And if we could see that deployed amongst the African American community, I think we're going to see a tremendous, tremendous opportunity for world peace.
Agreed, agreed. Basically using the tenets of the Torah to shape society.
That's for
Um,
sure what we're doing. If it happened to me recently, I'm traveling across the country. I got stopped over. You got a layover. You don't have enough time. You need a place to stay for Shabbat. There are people you can call, and the Jewish people, they don't know me from a hole in the wall. And I'm going to say, hey, I'm a Jewish guy. Here's my Hebrew name. Here's where I study Torah. Here's the name of my rabbi. I'm basically out of a place to sleep for a few days. Oh, no problem. We got a place for you. We got meals. If you need a little pocket money, whatever it is, we are a people and a nation, and we act that way. And no one is really stopping that from happening in the African American community outside of what it seems to me the government who's trying to put this divide and conquer strategy in place. So you got to just see right through it and lock arms using the principles of the Torah as the foundation.
Powerful, powerful. That's true. That actually is a good way to live life and to connect with your community that in any moment that you need help, they would be there for you. And that's actually really good. Really smart.
Yeah. And you could send me, I've said this before, you could send me to any single city almost in the whole entire world, and I will find a human who's Jewish who doesn't know me, who will take care of me like their brother.
Awesome, awesome. I guess we really need to use those tenets. Those are smart and wise tenets in the scriptures in the Torah and the Tanakh that can really benefit us. But I'm gonna let Rue actually ask a few questions here, and then we can go back to me. But Rue, you can go ahead and ask a few.
Thank you, Ivri. Hello, Rabbi. Appreciate you coming on today. Um, I wanted to get into the first question because you did allude to it earlier about the state of Israel. What is the disposition of the state of Israel and towards the revival of Jewish people around the world? And are they actually helping in the matter of Aliyah, or I mean Aliyah, or are they hindering it? In your opinion?
I mean, the interesting thing is over here that if you look at the government of Israel, you can call it, there's a Zionist government or backed by Zionist ideologies. So let's say I have now my ancestor who made Aliyah in the 1700s, prior to the Zionist movement. And he had a vision, he was a great rabbi, a great sage, Rabbi Eliyahu Kramer, the Vilna Gaon, that was his name. He had a vision for governance of the land that differed from the Zionist government. So for me, I'm able to take a stance of saying, hey, I don't agree with the Zionist principles and ideologies, but not because I'm anti Semitic or hate Jews, just simply my family predates it in the land. So we were there first. So that's why I feel safe coming out on this limb talking about it. But if you look at the first Zionists, the first leaders of the Zionist movement, they weren't even interested in making a Jewish state. They were making a state for the Jewish people, but not necessarily a Jewish state. There was even talks to merge with the church and link up with the church and make the Jewish people Christian, or their intentions were to make a safe haven where the Jewish people can flourish physically, intellectually, but not necessarily spiritually. So if you look at the writings of the sages of Israel for the last 2,000 years, it's all about the redemption, the unification of God and his name and the Torah and the people of Israel. But the government of Israel now, that's not their operating mindset of how are we going to bring the redemption and build a temple, for the future. It's just simply where they're not there, and their actions show that. So now that you see all these people around the world trying to, come into the fold and saying, hey, we have the seed of Israel, whether it's in Afghanistan, in Kashmir, south of China, in the Burmese jungles, or in Japan, or throughout Africa, or in South Africa, or South America, or wherever it is, you don't see the government of Israel necessarily coming and saying, wait a minute, we have an opportunity now to create a global family. They're kind of saying, hey, we have an opportunity to make people Zionists or Jews or supporters of the state of Israel. And for me, I think that's, it's obviously not what it's going to be in the future. And it's a dangerous thing. So the government of Israel today clearly isn't looking to bring everyone back in. But at the same time, it's a little dangerous because if you look at the numbers of the people today that identify as being from the House of Israel, it's over 100 million people. Just between Nigeria and Afghanistan, you have 100 million people who say they're from the House of Israel. The Jewish people today are like, what, 15 million or so? So obviously, there's going to be a situation where 15 million can't take on 100 million, because then whatever those 15 million people preserved for these thousands of years of the exile will instantly get lost and swept away. So I think that most of the Jewish people want the redemption, see a stage being set for the redemption, but absolutely have no clue how to go about such a great unification of such a large amount of people. And I think most people are just deferring and waiting for a figure, a Messiah, a messianic figure to come, make sense of this all, weave it together, and create something that we can all move forward on that doesn't change the laws that were preserved over the 2,000 years by the descendants of these Judeans still in the land, but also the opportunity to link up with 100 million people to make a movement, if
Appreciate
that
that
makes sense.
answer. That was a very candid answer. I appreciate it. To follow up on that, there's actually a great point inside the chat about how people in Israel may believe if they acknowledge Black Israel, they will all want to migrate to Israel. That is, which is far from the truth. And speaking on that, can we talk about the Biafra movement and their will to be Jewish and autonomous?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, just to address that question, I know for sure that the Israelites of Nigeria, the Igbo tribe, don't have a desire to necessarily move to Israel. They love their land. Their religion is called the religion of the land. They actually love where they are, and they would love nothing more than to stay there and be autonomous and live in peace. So I think that we have to get rid of the notion that everyone's trying to rush to Israel and move there. And we have to start saying, hey, we got to link arms beforehand. But we'll discuss what it means to be Jewish in that whole process. But just before what I was saying, with the world today, is like very centered around celebrityism, you know? So if a bunch of American citizens who also hold Israeli citizenship, like myself, like this guy Rudy Rothman, who was in Nigeria, got arrested, guys like Amari, who holds both, if we created a political party and had celebrities like Kanye and Jay-Z and whoever it is being like, oh, all right, we got this, we would be able to muster up enough energy to take the government of Israel in overnight, basically, as a political party. So we have to start thinking differently of how can we take our assets and the players who want to see that change and actually enter the stage to make that change. Because, like I said, celebrityism today is what controls how people think. That's how even Donald Trump, got his way into there with that celebrity power. But nonetheless, at the end of this, we could have a meeting of the minds to figure out how we can get the government of Israel into the hands of people who are concerned about the redemption of Israel. But regarding being a Jew, this is not something that was, a lot of people say, oh, the Talmud or the Jewish people, this is all European. This actually has nothing to do with Europe. Anything that has to do with Jewish, becoming Jewish, or the writings of the Jew, all date back from the Mishnah, which was written in Israel 2,000 so years ago, and in Babylon, so not even towards Europe, towards the other direction, towards Iraq. When the Israelites were exiled to Babylon, we codified the law. The yeshivas, the houses of study, existed in Babylon until the year 1000 or so. So you had 1,000 years of houses of study of Israelites in Babylon before there was a European or anyone mixing into there. There was just straight Israelites studying Torah in Babylon. And part of the code of the people of Israel was conversion. So what does it mean to convert? It means to take upon yourself the 613 commandments and their laws. That is how to become Jewish. The definition of a Jew is not necessarily a direct blood descendant from the 12 tribes. The direct definition of a Jew today would be someone who has synchronized, aligned himself with the 613 commandments of the Torah and the understanding of their explanation and how to fulfill these commandments. And the Jewish people aren't able to, or don't have the permission or the right to self-interpret the scriptures to figure out what those 613 are, or to how to keep those 613. For example, it says you shall make tzitzit, make fringes. Now I could show you amongst the African American Black Hebrew Israelite community 10 different opinions of what that means and 10 different customs and traditions that are totally different from each other. And so that's not going to create a unified nation if you keep having self-proclaimed prophets stepping up to the plate and saying, this is how I understand the verse. So when I'm wearing tzitzit, my strings right now, I'm not saying to you, this is me, Harry, with my own ego. Here, I got my strings. This is not me, Harry, with my own ego. I decided what tzitzit are. I'm going to say, I could tell you who my teacher was and his teacher was, all the way back to Moses, without missing one generation of a name, who passed down the information of how to make tzitzit, how to make a mezuzah on my doorpost, how to make a sukkah, how to dwell in the booth, how to properly slaughter an animal to its kosher, what parts of the animal can we eat, what are the identifying signs of animals that are pure and impure. This is nothing that anyone could have made up besides a transmission that came directly from Moses. And there was a Wikipedia page, a bio for every single human on that chain to Moses, where they lived, what they intellectually contributed to society. So I think people have to just really get their hands dirty and dive in and understand the transmission of Torah that the Jewish people have today. And if they so too want to decide to be Jewish, there is nothing in the world that can stop them from taking back what their inheritance is. If you are from the house of Israel, so here's your Torah, take it back, it's right here. But to come and say, no, I'm going to take the 5 books that you preserved throughout this exile, and I'm going to create my own little club and self-explain what the laws are. That sounds beautiful, but you're never going to scale to become, a great nation from that. You're going to have your own little community that won't be adaptable to other communities. Like when I travel around to the world and I'm in other Jewish communities, we have the same prayer book, the same laws. We have a unified system that's international. So I think that it's incumbent upon the African American community forgetting to say, like, I'm not trying to pitch you to become Jewish. That's not my agenda here. But whatever you do, make sure it's a unified system that actually makes sense and is not man-made by a human living today.
Okay, nice, nice. If Rue doesn't have any more questions, I can go into a question. But do you have any more, Rue? I don't want to stop your build because this is really good. It's really informative.
I need to step away for a second, but I would like to get back to some of these things, like you mentioned the importance of the Mishnah and its authority coming from the Sanhedrin and um, in the codification of our practices, which bind us together culturally. Um, what is the idea? Or actually, I want to get to Ray's question first, because she said you mentioned the ports that the Ebos were transported to. What ports would you say that they were taken to, and how would we trace that?
Well, I'm not going to say what I think they are. I remember going on the internet and finding a list of the ports, whether it's in Virginia, in South Carolina, in Georgia, definitely in, the Jamaica and South American regions. This is not a list that I made up, or it's not Harry's list, but there is a list I've seen where it says EBO, IBO, or HEBO, for different ports that these slaves were taken to. So if anyone interested, first thing I would do is just go to the internet and search and see, because that's what I was able to do and see a very clear and concise record of which tribes were brought to which ports.
Nice, nice. Okay. And Rue, do you have any more questions, or should we go on to the next part? Because if you have more questions, I can let you keep asking. Because this is a really good build.
Actually, I do have one last or actually, it's a two-part question. I wanted to pick your brain about Sanhedrin 94A if you're aware of it. And I also wanted to ask you about the ideas of conversion and naturalization and the ideas of residency versus citizenship.
Okay, so what was the first question?
Your thoughts on Sanhedrin 94A, where the Gemara asks where the 10 tribes were sent to by the Assyrians, and it says they were sent into Africa.
Freaky, the word is used. So it doesn't list one place specifically, but it lists a few places. Definitely some of them are in Africa, but we also know from the records that they were also sent to the Far East, into the land of Assyria, which is modern day Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran. But you 100% see the word Africa identified with a location of where the 10 tribes were sent. But if you look, the Talmud is never saying anything exclusive. They're not saying 100% of the children of Israel were sent into Africa. They were saying there were people from the 10 tribes who did go into Africa, because you see elsewhere they speak about people from the 10 tribes going into the Far East. And the way the Talmud works is there's always seemingly something that could be a contradictory statement to something else, and then the Talmud comes in and say, no, they're actually complementary. Just because they were sent into Africa doesn't mean they also weren't sent into the Far East. But you are 100% right. In the Talmud Sanhedrin, written thousands of years ago, we do see a record that the tribes of Israel were sent into Africa, as well as through the writings of Josephus, who speaks about that as well. But there's 100% clear evidence that they were all throughout the Silk Road 2,600 years ago as well.
I appreciate that nuanced approach. Also, the follow up questions are: if once we have this knowledge of self identification and we take on these practices, what does the conversion or naturalization process look like, and what is the difference between residency and citizenship in Israel, if there is one?
I'm not so sure about residency, but I do know people will be given, permission to dwell there or live there for certain work or, humanitarian reasons. But to become a citizen, you just have to become Jewish, right? And I know Israel has very backward laws, meaning if you go through a reform or conservative conversion, which most Orthodox Jews won't even consider you're really Jewish, the state of Israel will open the door right away for you. But if you do an Orthodox conversion, then the state of Israel is going to be scrutinizing your conversion and possibly give you a hard time, which is already one of the signs that there's something backwards going on over here. But in order for someone to convert, it's basically very simple. One is they have to be in a Jewish community. They have to be able to go to prayer with 9 other Jewish men or pray with a Jewish community. They have to have contact with a rabbi or someone who's going to be able to teach them Torah. And if they have that, they're in a Jewish community or they're able to be a part of a Jewish community and they've understood and learned and studied the laws, the customs and traditions of the Torah, that's basically it. Do you know how to read Hebrew? Can you study Torah? Do you know which of the holidays are? Do you know what we're supposed to do on the holidays? Great. You know all that and you live in the Jewish community? No problem. You convert right away. I know there's some places that will still charge to convert because there's rabbis whose full-time job is to help a convert and run the court, the Beit Din. But I also know that if someone can't afford it, there's people like me or my friends out there who will say, "Hey, we got a great convert. Don't let $1,000 stand in the way of him converting. Let's pay the Beit Din. Let's raise some money." So you'll see the Jewish people always helping out converts to raise money for the cost of their conversion because it obviously says in the Torah, "You shall love thy convert." You have to love the convert. It's a commandment. So it shouldn't be too hard to convert, but you have to put in the work. You got to know the Torah, you got to know the traditions, the laws, and the customs, and you have to be in a community of people doing that same thing.
Okay, I think that's a good segue into this next question. What authority should we practice? Should it be under Ashkenazim, Sephardim, Yemeni, Beta Israel, um, Limba? What do you think would be the best for us specifically as African Americans for us to have authority
That's a
and
great
practice
question.
under?
For the most part, Ashkenazim, Sephardim, and Yemenites have absolutely basically the same exact framework of how they understand and practice the Torah outside of extremely minute details that are so insignificant that you could see we're all talking about the same thing. This guy wraps his phylacteries this way. Oh, he wraps his phylacteries that way. This one says this prayer before that prayer. He says that prayer before this prayer. We're all talking about the same thing: the Yemenites, the Sephardim, the Ashkenazim. So I think between those three, we're on the same page. It should be within that framework. If I had to choose one and say, what are the laws, that these guys should practice, I would look back at the Rambam, Maimonides, who was living in Africa for a certain amount of time, who codified the law around 1,000 years ago, wrote down a full work of the laws of Israel. He was a Sephardic rabbi. That would just be a simple place to start because it was written in Africa, or at least some of it was. He went to Spain for a little, made it to Israel. And you have this Sephardic culture which flourished in Northern Africa. So that would make sense to me. The Ethiopians, for the most part, that have come back, there's two different groups of them. There's ones who have come back to the law and said, "Oh, I see that the law was preserved for 2,000 years. We're going to join this." And there are other ones who still keep their own ancient traditions of Ethiopia, which is fine. But over time, there's what's happening is the children are starting to create a unity amongst what's the common law of Israel based on the understanding of the law of Moses. But so I would say to join the Ethiopian traditions, you're going to be going into something that would be on the fringe of the greater house of Israel. And I'm not an expert even in what the Ethiopian customs and traditions are necessarily, but I could tell you that the Ashkenazim, the Sephardim, and the Yemenites, and the Mizrahi from Iran, they were from Spain, Yemen, Iran, and northern Russia for 2,000 years and all came back with the same exact system, laws, customs, and traditions. So you can't make that up. That's not a man made situation. That's not a European thing. That's not a Sephardic thing. That's not a Iraqi thing. That is all of us having an ancient piece of the house of Israel that we're now putting back together.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Okay. Yeah, I think that can help us a lot when knowing who. to look into when it comes to trying to
I would start with just the Maimonides, the Rambam, because at least there's no trauma with I know there's some sensitivities with European and the white men who did enslave these people and brought them to the ships and are still in the power seat in America, and white and wealth is identified as being the perpetuator of abuse. So until we figure all that out, let's leave Europeans off the table. We got our law from Maimonides, the Rambam. That's Rambam, who lived around 1,000 years ago, and simplified the Mishnah into code and law that we could easily follow and practice, written in from Africa.
nice, nice. I have to do a video on Maimonides and Rambam. You said.
Yeah, I mean, there's other people that we could look into, but he was just. They say there was no one like Moses to Moses. His name was Moses Maimonides. There was no one. Moses ben Maimon. His father was Maimon. That's why they call him Maimonides. But they say there was no one like Moses to Moses, meaning in the year 1000 in the current era, or around that year, he did what Moses did as far as making the Torah accessible for all of Israel. So the Rambam said, you don't need to break your head over the Mishnah or the Talmud anymore, because I wrote it all concise for you, laid out very clearly.
Nice, nice. Okay. So the next question, I sort of, well, I guess not really a question, but statement. There's a lot of people in the comments talking about DNA. Do you believe that DNA is important, or should we just look to the customs and the culture? Of course, everybody's going to have their own views when it comes to DNA, but this is a free country, so y'all can keep your views and stuff. Everybody in the chat and on the panel, but I just want to hear your thoughts on DNA, if
I
it's
think
important or
in the
not.
future, as we advance in technology, it will be extremely easy to reverse engineer the Israelite diaspora through DNA. So you're going to have an app on your phone where you'll be able to see Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and literally a tree that branches out throughout four corners of the world, where people today will be able to 100% with certainty identify as being on that tree and that bloodline. I think it's going to go way beyond Africa into the Silk Road, into the Americas, far out into the northern tips of Russia. It's going to be all across the world, as the prophecy says, these DNA remnants of the ancient people of Israel. But since we're not there yet, because we don't know, we haven't mapped that out, we're probably too early. That's like trying to speak about the internet in like 1950 or 60. It's like we could foresee it, but we're just not there yet. I will say with certainty, one day, the Messiah will probably come, map out the whole entire family tree of Israel using DNA, and we'll know exactly who was who and who wasn't. But until then, DNA is somewhat irrelevant, simply because the Torah allows for conversion and even says, thou shalt love thy convert. So let's say someone converted and became a sage or a people of Israel. Now he's got a direct descendant male son. Someone's going to say, oh, you don't have DNA of the people of Israel. You don't have the bloodline. You're not from the children of Israel. I would say back to that person, wow, you just made up a new religion, because what Torah do you have? My Torah says that you shall love the convert. Someone can convert. So how are you making this an exclusive club about bloodline only? It can't possibly be an exclusive club about bloodline only without taking away from the fact that we will one day map out the descendants through the bloodline. And just a heads up, I got until my part two. I have about 5 or 6 minutes left until we got to pause for part two tonight.
Okay, I'll let Root take on the last question, and then we'll sign off, and we'll meet back up here tonight at around midnight Central Standard Time. But Rudy, have one last question, or we can just sign off right here.
Oh, we could sign off right there.
Okay, thank you for coming, Rabbi Harry Rosenberg, and thank you for giving us your time. And we can't wait to see you tonight to ask more questions and to get deeper. And do you have any last thing, anything you want to say last? Where can the listeners find you and to learn more about your work?
Definitely, on Instagram at Rabbi Harry, I post weekly thoughts on the Torah from the side of spirituality. I have other things. I'm always happy for people to reach out to me. I personally don't take any offense for anyone who, wants to say something impolite or rude or angry at me, because that person must have something inside of them that where they're feeling pain, and I'm going to be sympathetic and understand that. So, there's no holds bar. You could say whatever you want to me. I'm not going to get offended, but I will be there to help work through the process. And if I had one prayer, first of all, I'd just say give thanks to the Most High that we're able to be alive during this time and to do this type of work of trying to unite His people. But I do want to say one thing, that I'm all in. So if there's any plan to get together and to take Israel back for righteousness and holiness and for the Torah, I don't care about color, religion. It all means nothing to me. We have an obligation to bring world peace and truth into this world, and you can count me signed in.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay. And thank you for coming, everyone. Again, later tonight, midnight. And I'll start a second live here in a second to talk about from my previous videos. But thank you, Rabbi. And we're going to sign off. Shalom, everyone. Shalom. Have a great rest of your day.
Shalom.